I've hit the button. I think we're going live. If y'all can mute if you're not talking real quick. All right, welcome everybody. It is the third Wednesday of the month. That means it's time for the Kubernetes office hours. This is our monthly live stream where we hop onto YouTube, we grab a bunch of questions from Kubernetes users in our Slack channel, and then try to answer as many of them as possible. So before we get started, sorry, I lost my place there. This is a Kubernetes event, so the code of conduct is in effect, so please be excellent to each other. But before we begin, I'd like to introduce our glorious panel. If all three of you could just take a second to introduce yourselves, what you work on, where you work, that sort of thing. Let's go with Samu, Josh, and then Derek, you can cap us off. So let's go.
Hey, Kubernetes users, this is Vamshi Samudrada, the infrastructure admin and kind of developer lead at American Airlines. I'm a certified CKA admin and a certified solution architect. I'm here to help to questions posted on.
Hi, I'm Josh Burkus. I work for Red Hat. I actually mostly work on Kubernetes community and contributor stuff. So I'm happy to take questions on contributing to Kubernetes. And my hobby is running databases on Kubernetes.
Hi, I'm Derek Campo. This is my first time doing this, so I'm new here.
Welcome.
I'm a staff SRE at VMware. I work on the VDP team, so we run PCI compliant Kubernetes clusters. So I'm kind of a cluster operator running on Amazon. Also have CKA, AWS Solutions architect as well.
Awesome.
And here to help.
Great. And if you're listening in the chat, let us know where you're from. Let us know how we sound, that sort of thing. This is an experiment for us. We've been trying to find a good time slot for the West Coast edition. So this is, we've tried noon before to try to catch people at lunch. We've tried late to catch people late when they're hanging out. And this is going to be the attempt at seeing what people are doing after work. So I see there are people definitely listening in on the live stream. So thank you for listening in. So let's go over the ground rules here real quick. As I mentioned before, the code of conduct is in effect. We never really had a problem here. Just be awesome on the Slack to each other. This is also a judgment-free zone, so everyone had to start from somewhere. So there are really no like silly questions or things like that. So please try to be supportive in the channel since everyone had to start from somewhere, and we're trying to help each other out here. And while we will do our best to answer your questions, the panel doesn't have access to your cluster, so live debugging is going to be off topic. But we will do our best to at least tell you where you should look or maybe some best practices on how you can at least take the problem that you have and move a little bit further on getting it solved. Panelists, you're encouraged to expand on your answers with your experiences and your pro tips. Audience, you can help us out by pasting URLs to official docs, blogs, or anything that might be relevant to the topic at hand. I do know that we learn about a new tool just about every single time we have one of these, so that's always useful. You can just post your questions directly into Slack, and what we do is we'll put them in a little document. We'll read them back to you. If while we are debugging your problem, if we need more information from you, we might put you off to the side to let you get the information that you need and come back to you. So do feel free to ping us. We can definitely come back things and make things clear. So if you don't understand anything, feel free to do that. You can also help us out by tweeting, spreading the word, and paying it forward. And as always, this panel is made entirely of volunteers. So if you want to rotate in, please let us know. We are always happy to have people that have Kubernetes experience to help answer questions. And with that, it looks like BB just joined. You want to introduce yourself real quick to the audience?
Hey guys, I'm Bhargav Bikaji, and I'm a consultant for Kubernetes and helping out customers in deploying on that environment.
Awesome. All right. And real quick, I'd just like to thank the following companies for supporting the community with their developer volunteers: Giant Swarm, StockX, Pivotal, Pusher.com, Weaveworks, VMware, University of Michigan, Red Hat, Spectrum, and Utility Warehouse. And as always, special thanks to the CNCF for sponsoring our t-shirt giveaway. If I address your question live on the air, we will add you to a guaranteed to be random t-shirt giveaway. And I like to give out 2 shirts per episode, so that works. So with that panel, we ready? I see the questions are starting to line up here. We all ready? How's everyone feeling today? Excellent. All right. So we will go about an hour overall, and then I like to save the last few minutes to do the t-shirt and all other kinds of stuff. So the first question is, hi, I've set up a multi-master cluster with kubeadmin. Everything is working fine, but I want to make some changes to the arguments passed to the API server. What is the best way to do that? Some suggest changing a config file. Some talk about a config map. Some mention kubeadmin config, and some talk about /etc/Kubernetes/manifest. What is the preferred way to add arguments to that, and do I need to do that on each master individually? Anyone want to take a stab at this one?
This is one of those ones I need to look at because this is an area where there's been active development.
Yep.
Like one of the first things I'd ask is, well, what version are you using?
Yeah.
Because the kubeadmin team has been hard at work moving all of those things to configuration files.
Okay.
So I would say the future-proof option is configuration files. The question is whether or not all the options that you need are currently covered in the configuration files.
Okay.
I do believe if this is an already running cluster, you're going to have to add that to each master.
Okay.
I believe that's the case.
Okay.
What
are the chances that you know what happens on upgrades?
You want to take that, Samu?
Sorry, I had to ask.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. But I think that the kubeadium config view kind of a thing on running it as one of the master, it should give you an input on across across the master nodes. What does it have? All the arguments, right? They are pretty much they can do that. They can do that and then obtain that config map, which looks like the config file from all the masters, and then store it in a place and use it like that. But again, to your question, to the upgrades, I think yeah.
I was going to say, well, the config files are supposed to get upgraded.
Yeah.
But I'd say I also am one of the 2 writers for Last Week in Kubernetes Development. And I will say pretty much every week there's a bug fix with the upgrades.
Yeah.
So they're supposed to get upgraded, but definitely verify before you finish the upgrade.
Yeah, I think what does the kubeadium upgrade do? This is generally for the kubeadium upgrade or something. If we run it across that, right, it does upgrade it to each one of it and then give a part of it, or also it upgrades the config file under it, right, to the manifest file or something.
Yes. Yep.
So
yeah. Where it just coughs and gives up is if you have some sort of confusing configuration. So where you have some stuff in manifests and some stuff in config files.
Oh yeah, that's a thing. Yep.
You know, and particularly because they are moving towards config files for everything. If you have an older installation where you've done everything as command line options, and you try to upgrade it, it will halt and refuse to upgrade. And in recent versions of kubeadmin, it will spit out a generic config file for you to use to make your custom config file.
So I have my own theoretical question that I want to add to this. The host gets to add questions. It's prerogative.
Oh yeah.
Upgrade in place or new cluster and move the workload over. As I've been starting to be more involved in understanding cluster API, I've started to move away from the upgrade in place and then just let.
Yeah, it's always a question which we get posed on, right? Whether we need to do an in-place upgrade or spin up a new cluster and then try to move the workload over.
Yeah, exactly. Because I know what I think in my head is the right solution. Obviously, every situation is different. Every deployment is different. Any of you have any production experience on this?
Yeah, so we're not using kubeadium directly. We're using kops for our clusters, but we've got I think in the neighborhood of 40 to 50 clusters in total that we're managing. And so it'd be really hard to cut over and migrate all of those, right? And do new clusters. And plus we don't manage the tenant workloads. So we have to upgrade in place pretty much.
Yeah, they're not your workloads, right?
Yeah, they're not our workloads. So we don't control those pipelines. We don't control those deadlines. We don't control if they're working or not, right?
Yeah.
So we have quite a bit of extensive tests in our pipeline to help validate that our stuff is working. We heavily encourage our tenants to use pod disruption budgets, so they kind of respect like the node upgrades, so we don't kill their workload, especially for production, right? That's
Sama,
kind of from our side.
Sama, do you mind finding the doc link to pod disruption budgets? I'd like to get that in
Sure,
the
sure.
notes as possible.
Finding it up.
Great.
Yep.
Yeah, Bargov. So I was going to ask Bargov to throw in here for upgrade in place versus new cluster. BB, you there?
Yeah. He
Yeah,
just
hi.
muted. Hey.
Yeah, so I mean, based on my experience with customers that I've seen, right? So we do in place upgrades. So recently there was an issue which we found when we did with 1.19, with especially one of the networking in place. The versions that had different versions did not really come through. Example, Calico with the topology feature that is being enabled on 1.19 did not come through. So it depends on you have to know when you upgrade what you are getting into, and then you have to disable accordingly, make sure things works. So you have to be you have to try it beforehand if you really want to do an upgrade in your production cluster. So I would wait for test it out in a non-production environment and try it out in production. So that's an issue I saw with one of our customers recently when they went with 1.19. So I mean, they had a downtime for about 30 minutes before we could figure out what the issue was. And then, yeah, I mean, it depends, right? You need to try it out. Or the other way we do typically suggest is to take a backup of all your database, stateful sets, and then, move it to a different cluster, bring up, for example, Valero does this. They take up the backup of your stateful set, your pods, everything, so you can bring up a new cluster and shut down the old cluster, and probably the new cluster is in the new, latest version.
Okay.
Yeah. For me, it varies. I only run very small clusters because this is all open source stuff. So either for Red Hat or for the CNCF.
Right.
Most of the ones run by Red Hat for various projects are actually run on bare metal. And so those get upgraded in place because obviously there aren't necessarily extra nodes available for new clusters.
Right.
Believe it or not, despite the, like when I run for the CNCF, despite the fact that it runs a database, we still do new cluster. So we spin up a new cluster, start database replication to the new cluster. When the database is caught up, then we kill the old cluster.
Semi-related, since I know you run databases in cluster usually, right? Okay. And obviously, if you were an Amazon and running an RDS, easier, would you say?
Easier than RDS? It's easier for me just because I find the RDS security model incredibly painful.
Okay.
I mean, anything on AWS is easy until then you need to define fine-grained access.
Yeah. Actually, let me rephrase the question for you. I'm trying to get a specific answer out of you. I'm just trying to figure out how to tease it.
Yeah.
When it comes to upgrades, are there any benefits for having your database outside the cluster, or do you prefer to kind of eggs in one basket is kind of the wrong way to, I guess, describe it, or do you prefer to
I would
keep
actually,
everything coupled, I guess is what I want to ask.
Right. I would say there's actually a pretty strong advantage at upgrade time. There's a pretty strong advantage to running at least the main database that I run on Kubernetes, which is Postgres, right? And there's a pretty strong advantage to running that in Kubernetes at upgrade time, right? Because inside Kubernetes, I can run fully automated failover. And that means I just treat the upgrade as a failover event.
Okay.
Which, whereas if I'm running it outside of Kubernetes, then generally first step in the upgrade is to set up failover from scratch.
I see.
Which is not,
so by treating the database just like another Kubernetes object, you're kind of...
Yeah. You have to take some special steps, right? Because just because you have a new Postgres node, just because you have a new Postgres pod up doesn't mean it's caught up.
Okay.
Right? You need to check for that. Because it could be operational, but still slurping down data from the other instances of Postgres. And that's true actually with any multi-node database, right? You run, one of the first things you check, you put up a new Cassandra node, right? And it catches up from the other Cassandra nodes. and it can take a while, particularly if you've configured it to have a very low impact on query processing.
Okay. Good to know. And my last follow-up before we move on to the next question is, this is just a interesting topic to me, and I think it's worth talking about, is, do you have a rule of thumb when it comes to in-place upgrades? Like after it's like the third or fourth in-place upgrade, do you start to sweat a little bit? Like I'm thinking of the whole like, hey, I keep upgrading my laptop operating system, and then at some point you do a clean install, and it's like, wow, this is what a working computer feels like. Any of those issues, or have you not run into that yet?
Well, if it's a question for me, I just haven't run into it yet.
Yeah, yeah.
We've had-
Panel in general. Feel free to let's do a quick
Yeah.
circle. Yeah.
Some of the little clusters we've been running, it's been running since 110.
Okay.
So
That
Yeah, I
gives
mean,
me a
I'm
little
not-
confidence of
I
the
think-
upgrade process, though. Sorry, Derek.
No, you're fine. Sorry. I mean, I don't think we've really had too many gremlins with in-place upgrades, but again, I mean, our clusters aren't more than a year and a half, 2 years old at most, so they're not too old. I think 112 might have been the version at inception. But I mean, we get gremlins from other things, right? So I don't know that they're necessarily upgrade related.
Right. Samu?
Yeah, I think what I've been upgrading from 1.11, not 1.10 across it, 1.10 to now we are running around 1.16 or so for some of the small clusters in. But for the small clusters, it's like never an issue. So it's just a straightforward one. But just like some workloads with I have some bare metal physical servers as a worker nodes, which has like 50 cores and 500 gigs of memory on those nodes. So that big of a nodes, when trying to upgrade it and moving the workload across it, if the compute is not enough for the other clusters, so those kind of small issues, but across from the upgrade, I don't think so. So
Yeah. BB? What
Yeah,
about
I mean, so in generally it has been smooth. The upgrades have done to my customers, except during 1.16 release, the Helm charts were failing, and that's one time, things were not working. And recently with 1.19, with certain network plugins, especially with Calico, with the topology spread feature. So I think that's the only thing I've recently seen. It's not majorly a big issue as of now, is what I see.
And I guess one other thing we did run into once, which would really apply to either. So we were changing a node group type as one of our upgrades, and we actually ran into capacity issues in AWS. And that really put us back on one of our prod upgrades because there just was no capacity for the instance type in that region. So that was a fun one to deal with. And it took a couple days before Amazon was able to provision more capacity for us.
Was it are the clusters that huge, or was it like an uncommon instance
It
type?
wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't even that big. I think we're at like 12 nodes or something on that cluster, but that type, there was just none available. And it was in certain regions, right? Or just a different capacity, less capacity, like in GovCloud.
Oh, right. Yeah. That totally makes sense. All right. Any other feedback on upgrade? The reason I asked about that is I remember when kubeadmin turned on RBAC by default during installation, and I remember people going, "Whoa, my thing used to work and now it doesn't work," because like it was actually enforcing RBAC. And I'd like to think that disruptive changes like that are in our past, but you never know. So, all right, awesome, great, some awesome learnage there from the panel. I appreciate that when it comes to upgrades. Moving on to our next question is about Ingress. I hope you all love Ingress. How does Ingress resource map to Ingress service/pods? I see kubernetes.io/ingress.class equals Nginx, but not sure how this translates /links to Nginx-ingress controller service. Any ideas on this one? I just kind of want to explain how this works.
I think I was just answering that in the chat
okay.
also. It's like it just works like any multiple ingress. Like if you want to run a multiple ingress cluster on the same cluster, right? So you can set the class. You can change the class not only from basic Nginx to any other class which you want to set it up. It does not always defaults to that class. You can just set it up based on the cloud provider or based on any other class. If you want to run two Nginx, two or multiple applications in the same cluster with the different ingress controllers, you can just set a class as different, and the service name is like again the pod mapping with it goes inside, right? So it does map it
map it something with inside like pod class, something like that. I don't remember the exact how is it mapping, but it's just similar kind of thing. Such. Or any other comments on that?
I'll just
I'm
add
just-
that we do something similar, right? We run 3 to 5 different Ingress controllers on most of our clusters, just based off different kind of rules at layer 7, layer 4, if it needs to be mapped to just the corporate network or not, or if it needs to be publicly exposed to the internet. And we use the same thing there. We use the class mapping there in the annotation to pick it up and route to the right one.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else
Yeah,
have an opinion
pasted
on
a couple of links. Yeah, I've pasted a couple of links there on the chat, and there, yeah, that works.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna skip this control plane one because that feels like we would have to debug what's going on there in actual Amazon. But we'll come back to it if we can. Question is, hello, does anyone know how to consume all pod failure events? I want to see things like probe failures, but I also want to see failures in the horizontal pod autoscaler. I was looking at the audit log webhook, but I'm not sure if this has this information. Thoughts on this one?
I think the probe failures would probably come through kubelet, right? So, and then your horizontal pod autoscaler failures would be in the pod logs. I think you'd have to parse 2 different log sources and combine them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not super confident on that, but
Let me generalize a question there at the end a little bit. How do you consolidate logs? How do you all kind of, if you had to figure this out, how would you do this?
Yeah, it's again very tricky one because the thing is, the log someone drains it out to an external logging, right? We use several logging tools. Like we use LogDNA to just completely set out the logs of the cluster from where everything is being set out there, and we just filter it out from the LogDNA and have our dashboards or anything that's being written and we set out there. So I didn't like if it is an individual one, it's like again it's checking in different places.
Yeah, so see, there are different types of failures, right? What do you mean by pod failure? That could be a control plane failure and a runtime failure. What I mean by control plane failure is this, right? You bring up a pod, scheduling fails. There are about 15 reasons why a scheduling can fail. Now you need to figure out why. It could be due to the resource issue, or it could be due to, a port conflict, or it could be some volume issue, whatnot, right? There are about 15 reasons for that. Now, when you go to a runtime, the pod has been scheduled, and the high chances that the pod has been, that is crashing. The pod is crashing. In those cases, what you need to do is look at the exit code of the pod. When you look at the exit code, it gives you you can disambiguate saying whether it's an application issue or it's an Kubernetes issue from the exit code. Like I guess 1 or 2 or 3. I'm just the numbers are 1, 2, 3. I guess from top of my mind, it tells you that it's a problem with the application. Anything more than 127, 128, it tells you there's an issue with Kubernetes. In general. So it's a memory OOM killed, etc. So that's another type of failure. Now, when you do a horizontal pod update, the chances of the rolling updates, HPA, or node upgrades, all that, the chance of that the pod failing is high. Then again, the issue is with the Kubernetes. So as one of the panelists said, right, you need to correlate events from multiple places to figure out where the problem is. The key thing I'll figure out is what the issue is, whether it's a pod pending issue or it's a runtime issue. As the first step, I would figure out that. If it's a runtime issue, I will figure out the exit codes and see where the issue is. If it is not a runtime issue, it's a pod pending issue, I'll go figure out why this pod has failed. I think that's how I will go and debug this issue.
That seems reasonable to me. Anyone else have opinions on this one?
That was very detailed explanation.
Yes. Yeah. I was just thinking when you mentioned 15 ways things to fail, I actually in my head started to count them, and I was like,
yeah,
like my own limits, is that one? But my own limits I accidentally set wrong. Does that count? So.
And there was one more thing which I recently was encountered with although the compute is available on the nodes, the pod was not coming up. So the compute was available on the nodes. When I see the pod was still not schedulable, but the compute was available. But when I went back and troubleshooted, I saw that there was setting on the master that says that these many pods have to be, there's a limit on the pods onto the node. So it cannot spin more than, although the compute is there, there's a limit on the pod that pods can come up on the nodes. So in that case, either the limit, some configuration or some limit or somewhere that's sitting
Yeah,
there.
so that three things. I mean, from a scheduling perspective, it looks at three things: memory, CPU, IO, and the max pods.
Yeah.
Right. For example, if you go to EC2 instance on Amazon, EC2 medium, you can only schedule 17 pods. That is part of the kubelet configuration. So you cannot schedule more than that, even though if you have the CPU and memory. So these are the four, basic parameters used for scheduling. And there's an extensible resource also that you can use, whether it's a GPU, things like that. So it depends on multiple factors, I would say. You need to figure out where the failure is really happening, look at these factors and correlate and see what the problem is.
Yeah, generally when the product is given by the vendor-driven product, it's like a vendor-driven product or something. These are like predefined configured files, and that they're sitting inside the container somewhere. If it is an open source, yes, we have. If it is an open, which we know that there's a configuration file that's been sitting there. So that's where you spend some time based on some tooling around it. Yeah.
That was going to be my next question. How did your pod number not match the hardware, unless you did that on purpose? You know what I mean? Like if you had all the CPU available, how did you end up at the initial number, I guess is my question.
You mean, see, for example, EC2 medium has 17 max pods. Why did they end up with that number?
Right, like Sami, you just said you had the node itself had plenty of compute.
Compute, yes.
Yeah. How did you arrive at the initial number of allowed pods on that node?
There was no limit. I did not see the limit of it, but it saw that there was some memory or something that's exhausted when the parts are risen. But again, the memory was available. The restarting the master nodes has kicked it off, and there was a limit in one of the settings when you to your question. There's a limit on the settings that sits on the master nodes to allow how many parts that you should get it onto the worker node.
Right. So did you adjust the number, or did you just realize that?
Oh yeah. To troubleshoot that, yes, I did adjust the number. Yeah, I did adjust the number and then just did a reboot on the master.
Yeah, that was my next question, because we get this a lot when people ask about auto scaling and things like that, and maybe you have some insight on this as well. Is how do you get your initial set of numbers to kind of make your best guess, right? Because when things break, I'm sure you can adjust them, but like, how do you know? Do you have a little chart with, well, this machine has X amount of CPUs, X amount of RAM in it, and this instance type?
Yeah, but again, these are like over the shared clusters kind of a thing, right? We don't know with the limit of number of parts. If it is a dedicated cluster, we would have known. Yes, we have the workload is about like this much of workload is being estimated for this cluster. We'd have estimated that. But these being enterprise shared clusters, very big clusters, which a new workload will be coming in, and we don't know how many parts we're going to run.
Right.
Yeah, and so we don't know what like tenant workloads will be on our clusters either, right? So we use Cluster Autoscaler to help manage that, which of course we do run into issues too, where they're sitting kind of at a high level, right? Like Cluster Autoscaler is keeping it kind of at an n equals n state instead of an n+1 state. We do have problems sometimes where tenants quickly scale something up and they're sitting in pending pod for 8 minutes or so while I wait for a new node to get scheduled and come online and be in a ready state.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Talk about pod failures. Awesome. Our next question is back to Ingress, and I want to quiz for the panel. Ingress just went GA. How long do you think it's been in beta? What version? Or when it went alpha, actually?
106.
1.6. Yeah.
1.06.
We figured that this morning. We went through some of the blogs, and I guess now from Josh, I don't know if you can explain this, but features are expected to graduate alpha to beta to GA in a certain amount of time now, instead of being in beta forever. And let me find the link to that blog.
Yeah.
Wait, was that right?
Was what right?
Was that the correct answer?
1.6? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it right on the money.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, mostly what that's resulted in is that we've just killed off a bunch of alpha features. You know,
Right.
look in the deprecated thing, you just mostly see, this feature that has been, in alpha for the past 5 releases,
Right.
and now nobody is working on it, is going bye-bye.
Yeah.
Which is sad, because some of them you look at it and I'm like, well, nothing actually replaces that feature.
Yeah.
But mind you, I wasn't using it because it was alpha. So
Yeah. So that you kind of go into the whole project archaeology thing then. Do you want to keep a thing in there that no one's using, or do you want to, like, even though you're going to break, even though we just say we don't really, alpha, beta APIs or whatever, but you know what I mean? It's just kind of one of those things that
nerd, I mean, we
is
should
it better
totally
or worse to remove it?
We should totally get rid of it. Oh, let's put it in another way. I am not seeing anybody showing up on KubeDev and screaming that if only someone had told them, they would have maintained this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and here's a link. I'm sticking this in chat. It's on the Kubernetes blog. It's called Moving Forward from Beta. I just wanted to mention that real quick as a snippet for everybody, because that's a pretty good thing to know when it comes to alpha, beta, GA features. And that brings us on to our next Ingress question. 1 second. Can anyone help me? I am lost. I've tested an application on my local, I'm assuming local laptop, and it works fine. However, when I deploy using Kubernetes, the pods seem like they're working fine, but I cannot get the Ingress to work. I've seen various issues, but now my cluster has seemed to gotten into a state where I cannot install the Ingress anymore. Can anyone walk me through setting up Ingress like I'm 5? I realize that this is a, read a huge page of docs to me. So can we maybe try to keep this a little bit more conceptual as to the steps of how you all set up Ingress after you've done. So you do your kubeadmin init, right? And that doesn't set up Ingress, right?
No, I think for installing the Ingress, I think we go through a different route. We install it's in a different namespace. We create a namespace and we just install the Ingress controller inside it and then use it as in the inward and egress for any Ingress and Ingress communications based on the configuration. And I just follow the docs. It's very simple, and there are a lot of vendors out there who has given the Ingress out documentation around it.
Yep.
And I've pasted a couple of links in there, but yeah. If any other comments on that, how do you guys install it? Derek or
Yeah.
Margo?
So I mean, like at a high level, right? If you say we're running on Amazon EKS or COPS or whatever, you install a layer 4 Nginx Ingress, right? Because I think there's a couple different options out there on the guide and the docs there.
Mm-hmm.
You install that in a namespace like Nginx Ingress, I think is a default, right? And then you deploy your app into another namespace usually, and then you got to create the Ingress record. And as far as like to troubleshoot that to make sure that everything's getting linked correctly, you can do a kubectl get ingress on your application namespace and make sure that you see the record there, and you should see an address in there just with the default output. And if that doesn't line up with an Amazon ELB, then it's not getting mapped to the Ingress correctly, because that should get carried through from the Ingress controller. So maybe the annotation is missing on there. You could look at the logs in the Nginx Ingress controller and see if there's anything useful in there. If you do see an address in there and it looks like that part is linked correctly, then next step would be I would start looking at the endpoints to make sure your service in the pod has the correct label selectors there. So you can do a kubectl get endpoint, or you can massage the Ingress output to show the output mapping there to make sure that's lined up the services that it has matched there at endpoints. You'll see IP addresses and ports there if those have matched correctly.
And are y'all just basically using Nginx? Is that what y'all default to?
That's what we're using currently.
I think that's the most mostly used, and pretty much people will try to, if you don't, the best practice is documentation, right? It's to create a different namespace and install it rather than doing it in the kube system or somewhere. Or in the default namespace, try to create a new namespace for it and then try to install, just follow the documentation, because there are Helm charts out there for Ingress. You don't need to manually install it with the files and everything. Helm charts are like, they have updated now with the Helm 3. It's like much more simple. It's just a simple command, a simple one-line command that would word install and everything for you inside the cluster.
Yeah, and if it's kind of stuck in a state where it won't install anymore, I mean, you can delete the namespace, try to clean everything up. Hopefully you don't get stuck with any finalizer problems with some things not cleaning up correctly inside the namespace, but that's kind of where I would start, is just starting fresh, and then following the Nginx Ingress Helm chart would be a great place to start if the documentation, like the static manifests, aren't working there. And if it is Amazon, you're running it there, I think Amazon has some additional guides on how to run the Nginx Ingress with AWS services specifically.
If you can give me a URL for that, that'd be useful. Yeah. All right. In the meantime, we're going to move over to DNS, everyone's favorite subject. This is another opinion one. We're going to have to stand up a new DNS server because external DNS doesn't work well with Microsoft Active Directory. Has anyone had much experience in this area? Looking at suggestions on what to use for the server, I would think bind or core DNS would be logical choices, but would like more opinions.
I mean, I love core DNS, but I don't need to make it work with Microsoft AD, so.
Yeah. Well, I would... I shouldn't assume, but I would assume you would just set Microsoft AD as the upstream DNS to core DNS.
That would work, right?
Yeah, that should work. See, this is why it's always DNS. BB, what are you using for DNS?
Ooh, we have a question in the chat.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Long, since you're here live, we'll go ahead and default to your question, but we'll get back to the DNS opinion. Long, welcome to the show. Asks, Long, I'm going to give you a t-shirt today, so stick around after, because you're the first person to ask a question the entire show. We've been going through the backlog here. Do you guys have docs on how to use an HTTPS default backend for Ingress? Let's talk about this a little bit. I see people typing, people Googling. Let me give him the YouTube URL.
So what does it mean? He's like, okay, do you guys have docs on how to use HTTPS backend default for Ingress? Generally, any default backend, I think the URLs, like if the health check URLs he's talking about, or how is that? The default backend, because the default backend generally exposes the /health or some minimum URLs, like it's just that returns 200, and then you check the health. What?
Right. Ask him in chat.
Yeah. I see Long is typing, so I think they're listening in, so that's good. Let's give him a minute to type. While he's typing, any other opinions on your favorite DNS? Inside cluster?
We're a core DNS shop on our clusters. Generally happy with it. I mean, haven't really had issues yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, core DNS went 1.0, and I converted, including stuff that wasn't running on Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Like some of my private DNS, because I have every laptop I have runs a DNS server, right? So, and I converted those all to core DNS because it was so much easier.
Yeah. I know we're supposed to love core DNS because it's like a Kubernetes thing and SCNC, and all that great stuff. But it, coming from the old school world of bind, like my home DNS server running on core DNS is like one of the most, it just makes me happy because the file is so simple and things like that.
Oh my God, I used to be a certified bind admin.
Why would you tell me that?
I never, ever want to go back to it.
Yeah. Don't forget to increment the number. Okay, so let's try to figure out the question here. He says the default backend is a feature. Oh, default dash backend. Okay, so Nginx. Let me see. Does anyone understand this question better than me?
No, I think they were asking because what they were asking is how they were, yes, no docs, how to use a default HTTPS default backend for Ingress, because this is not a service. Like a HTTP default backend is a service. It's like a service that checks for the URLs on the health check. So I'm not sure what exactly the question is on how to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you want to replace the original default. I mean, if you want to use it, you want to replace it something else that you want to use it for. Like, you want to replace the service. Basically, that's what I think the question is. Right?
Yeah, okay. I
Today,
think
right, by,
yeah. Okay.
so you have to replace that service to your default and make it work for you.
Yeah.
If the whole host path doesn't match, if that path doesn't match, you get to default. And what is the URL that you want to provide in that case? Right? What is that you want, the response that you want to provide? That could